Hey everybody, today we're going to be talking about the Blumenfeld counter gambit, which is a really fun and dynamic weapon. And the reason that we're talking about it today is because I had a viewer reach out to me and he said, hey man, I'm playing in a big tournament. I'm about to play the final round. I'm in a must-win situation with the black pieces, and my plan is to surprise my opponent with the Blumenfeld counter gambit. And I honestly think that if you're in that situation, you're in a must-win situation with the black pieces, the Blumenfeld counter gambit is an absolutely excellent opening choice. So I'm really happy with the choice of opening that the opponent is going to go with, but I'm guessing based off their Lee chess profile that they're around 1500 or so. So I'm not exactly sure what rating level this viewer is, but I'm that's my guess, that's my estimate for this video. And I thought instead of maybe just deep diving into all the modern nuances and here's every tiny little variation that might appear, I thought it would be better to get kind of a general overall view of the opening by showing this model game where absolutely everything goes right for black. And you can see exactly what you're hoping to achieve when you play this opening if you watch this game from 1922 between Siegbert Tarrasch and Alexander Alekhine. So that's what we're checking out today, and I'm hoping this helps you, but also everybody else out there that might be interested in playing this opening, because it's a very dynamic opening, and it occurs after d4, knight to f6, knight to f3, e6, pawn to c4. And the first thing I actually need to mention is before we get right into it, there's actually at least 30 different ways, and that's not an exaggeration. There is 30 different ways of reaching the starting position of this opening. But I think perhaps the most interesting or the most likely to occur in your games is for anybody that gets to this position and you have something in mind against the Nimzo Indian, or maybe you have something in your repertoire belt, but you're not sure what to do when the opponent puts this knight on f3 and plays d4 and c4. Well, maybe you want to consider playing pawn to c5, and after white plays pawn to d5, playing this move pawn to b5. And this is the Blumenfeld counter gambit, and the idea here is to sacrifice a pawn, and your goal is to get it like a hyper accelerated Banco gambit on steroids. You're trying to play the Banco but get an improved version, and that's kind of what we saw in this model game, because if white wants to accept this gambit, and it should be mentioned briefly that they definitely do not have to, but if they want to accept this b pawn, they need to worry that this d pawn is attacked. So having our pawn on e6 has already created some direct pressure on the center, and white will need to take on e6 first, allowing us to recapture towards the center, and after white takes back, we play pawn to d5. And this is what you're hoping to get with the black pieces. And at first sight, if you've never seen this before, it may look like it's actually very hard for white to challenge the pawn center. And for only one pawn, we bring all of our center into alignment here. We're going to play bishop to d6. We're going to get castled. And, you know, one day we're dreaming of playing pawn to e5. And we're just going to try to roll over the opponent and absolutely crush them. And that's something that can definitely happen if you play this opening. Now, before we go deeper into this game, I do just want to briefly mention, without deep diving into the theory, I want to let you know that there's some other possibilities here for white, and the main one is this move bishop to g5. If you look in the master's database, you'll see that this is actually the most common way for white to play, and this kind of changes the focus a little bit. This is white just saying, I'm not interested in winning the pawn, I am going to intend on playing a positional game. And the main line here, not that you need to memorize, but maybe it'll be helpful just to see some of the ideas, is that if e takes d5, you take back, you can play something like pawn to d6. And this is kind of the structure that you're hoping to achieve as black. You get a little bit of extra queenside space, which sometimes, if you're playing a Benoni, your whole goal is to try to get your pawn to b5. You play pawn to a6, you're trying to play it, and white just keeps stopping you. Well, here, as black, you're able to do it right away, but there's obviously, it's not all positive. There are a little bit of the downsides, and the downside is that white actually might be able to strike at the queen side and get some sort of initiative over there if you're not too careful. So you need to play this kind of correctly, but given enough time, if you're able to just kind of consolidate and eventually you're able to like swing a knight into c5, you might be able to do some serious good on the queen side. So white also needs to be prepared to attack our queen side very quickly with a move like pawn to e4, opening up the bishop so that you're attacking the b5 pawn. And notice how there's this pin here going on, so you're not actually threatening to steal this e4 pawn right away. Now you're going to need to protect it, and here is where white is going to be challenging the queen side. And white needs to get these moves in pretty quickly. You got to play a move like pawn to a4, and I just want to caution you against making a major mistake as black here. One big thing that you could do wrong is to immediately recognize, like, uh-oh, white is threatening to just take this b pawn. Maybe I should keep things closed and play pawn to b4. Well, actually, this would be like a complete disaster for black, because now this knight comes in. It blockades the c4 square, and now your pawns are stuck and they're not able to move. But maybe worse than that, at some point there's going to be some coordination against your d pawn that could lead to a major disaster. You need to be able to keep your queen side fluid. You want it to always be able to move. You want to be able to make a lot of progress on the queen side. So instead of that, the main move that is played is bishop to e7, which breaks the pin, therefore threatening to win the pawn on e4. So hopefully this gives you some good ideas of how to play this early middle game. And here's just the main line. Normally players are taking, and this is straight from like the master's database. And after this recapture, you're able to grab on b2. It's this long, complicated line. But the reason that this is not super popular today is because you might get some position like this where material is equal, but you have the two bishops, you have a very solid position. But in a position like this, the problem is only white has a very active plan. And in the future, they can work towards trying to make this breakthrough work. But honestly, if you're in a must-win situation, you want one of these complicated positions where it's not necessarily obvious what exactly your opponent should be doing, and there maybe is a lot of different ways of handling this position, and you want to play a really long game. That's how Magnus would win this game. He would just play 1,000 moves and eventually hope that you blunder, wait for your opportunities, and hope that, okay, maybe my two bishops one day can demonstrate that they're worth something. But this is kind of like what you're risking. This is like the biggest thing that you risk by playing this opening, is you get some position like that. But if you're lucky, your opponents will accept your gambit, which is a very reasonable way of playing, and it actually in the database scores the best for white, so I think a lot of players might consider it. And if they do, you take back, and then you try to play like your name is Alexander Alekhine. You put your pawn on d5, and in this game, we saw pawn to e3. And while this actually objectively doesn't change the evaluation, at least according to Stockfish, at all, I think that if you have this as white, you need to be like really direct. When black has the center like this, if you're not careful and you don't strike at it immediately, you could just end up getting squashed. So maybe white, you know, in hindsight, should consider something more aggressive like knight to c3, which is not even the most popular move now, but you got to be playing for a move like pawn to e4 very quickly as white, or what happens in the game might happen to you. Because in this game, we saw pawn to e3, bishop to d6, the knight came out now to c3, and black just got castled. So white develops, white's getting ready to castle, and we get to a middle game like this. And now here was the most beautiful thing about this game. Black, even though they could maybe consider marching in the center a little bit earlier, was absolutely the most patient player in the world. They played bishop to b7. Okay, that helps. You got to protect your d-pawn if you want to play for e5. But now after b3, literally just develops all of the pieces. The knight goes to d7, bishop to b2, queen to e7. You get castled. Maybe I could consider pushing e5 right now. No, let's put our rook in the center. Let's give even more support to this d-pawn for the future. And black has just patiently waited, and eventually you're saying, white, what are you gonna do? Like, I am going to play e5, that is my idea, but I don't even have to do it yet. I'm just gonna chill out and wait for you to do something, and this is what happens in this game. Black is super ultra patient, and white eventually kind of doesn't know what to do and runs into a lot of trouble. Well, queen to c2, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, all of my pieces are developed, now I play pawn to e5, and my point is, I'm going to play pawn to e4, I'm going to get this huge structure, and I'm going to try to crush you. And now, white just plays perhaps the only real inaccuracy in the game, and puts this rook on e1. Now, the computer says you should put the other rook here, but it's maybe not that obvious how much pressure might come on this f2 square. Now, you might realize, okay, there's a rook menacing down this f-file, trying to get some pressure here, but this one little mistake, and now black is in the driver's seat for the rest of the game. Here he plays pawn to e4, attacking the knight has to hop back, and now comes knight to e5, and black wants to put one of these knights on the g4 square and begin to get pressure against f2. So the knight goes back, and you can kind of tell based on the next several moves, that white really has a very difficult time doing anything, and now it's black's turn to try to generate some sort of attack. And this pawn on e4 is such a spearhead that it makes it impossible for white to get any of the pieces over to the defense of the king, which also means that black has all day to attack. And even here, as things start to gear up, we play knight to g4, we're putting some pressure on f2. Obviously it's defended enough, but black has all day. Black doesn't even have to mate immediately because white will never be able to fully defend. In this game, we saw one of the knights getting captured. And now after knight to f1, another defensive move. Now the queen is defending here laterally. This knight is defending the h-pawn, which is attacked a couple times. Black brings the queen in to g5. h3, and here I think you're looking around for sacrifices. You're looking around for ways to potentially sack your pieces or have some sort of fun. But no, Alekhine says, you know what? I got plenty of time. I'm going to put my knight back on h6. Then I'm going to potentially maneuver it all the way back around. It takes a couple turns. I'm not worried. And then you can imagine this bishop coming into the game, either by playing e4, which is what happens in the game, or you could also be like, maybe sometimes the bishop would be dropping back and being able to sacrifice. All of the pieces are going to be able to work really well for black. And look at white. White is just tied up defending. So the king goes to h1. Knight goes to f5, and here comes knight to h2, and it's beginning to get a little bit difficult for the opponent. And already, again, there could be all sorts of tactics, but you know what? Why not pawn to d4? I got all of these squares sufficiently defended, and I'm hoping, I really wish you would open up this bishop. That would make it delightful for me. So white decides to drop the bishop back, gets attacked, and here comes the queen. So she enters the game with a check. The king hops over. And now comes bishop to b2, and you're still very paralyzed, and it's only now that we finally do an actual tactic with black, and black here decides to play knight to g3. And the idea is that you have to go over with your king, because if you are to take here, we just simply recapture with the queen. We're threatening this checkmate, and you don't even have time to drop back, attack our queen, defend against the mating square, because we're just simply going to be snatching this guy, threatening checkmate on the next move. So finally we get a position where we're doing some tactics. The king moves over, and absolute patience. First, bishop to d5, kicking the queen away from the action, and okay, whatever. Why don't you just go try to win that pawn or do something? We give a check. Rook to f7. Very patient. Maybe I'm just defending my pawn. Can do like whatever I want. You really can't do anything to stop me. The queen comes into b6 where she's keeping an eye on the bishop. Okay, that means I can't swing this rook over right away. That's not a problem. I'll just play h5, a nice restricting move. Now your knight is not going to be able to come in. I also have Luft just in case I ever need it. It's always great to have. White tries to break through, but now we see check. You go back. We take here. Yeah. Okay, have another check. Very patient. He checks him as many times as he wants. I can do whatever I want. You're helpless. And now comes pawn to d2, attacking the rook. So the rook decides to go over. Black just simply takes this, winning some material. And really the attack is still raging on. So the bishop hops back. And we just grab on h3. And now you can see that everything is just absolutely collapsing for the white pieces. The rook swings into f3. And, okay, this is grim. Knight to g3, defending against threats on h3. But, okay, we just push our pawn. You get attacked. Bishop to f6. This is actually the top move by white. But, okay, obviously, we can just simply take that. And when you move, deliver this check. And this was the last move of the game. Many things are hanging here for white. You're going to have to move your king over here. And then your rook is hanging immediately. Also, we can give this check. We can win this queen. Also, it's mate in 12 from this position. So it's going to end very soon. So white decided to give up the game. So I thought this was actually a really cool model game. As black, grab all the space, develop all of your pieces, play very patiently, and then just attack your opponent slowly, grind them down, and win the game. A fantastic showing by Alexander Alekhine, and hopefully that helps if you have to play this in a tournament. Okay, bye!
If you're feeling trapped like a queen, no blunders, only sacrifice and see, well, you may have the blues. Never be a chicken when you lose.